I slept with my cousin. You ever have that feeling when you know something's about to go wrong, but you push through it anyway, thinking you can handle whatever's coming your way? That's how it started for me. Out of nowhere, I get a call from my cousin, Katie. We weren't close growing up. Hell, we barely liked each other most of the time. But family is family, right? And when she called, sounding all desperate and on the edge, talking about how she lost her job and had no place to go, I couldn't just turn my back on her. So, I did what any decent guy would do. I offered her a place to stay. Figured it would be short-term. Maybe help her get back on her feet. And then she'd be out of my hair. My wife, Lisa, didn't see it that way. She flipped out the moment I told her. "You really think it's a good idea to bring her into our home?" she said, arms crossed, giving me that glare she's perfected over the years. And I get it, she never really liked Katie. Thought she was a mess, a leech, someone who'd mooch off us for as long as she could. "It's just until she finds a job," I said, trying to calm her down. But calming Lisa down is like trying to tame a wild animal. She got louder. "She's going to ruin everything. You know how she is." But I was stubborn, said that family sticks together, that I couldn't leave her out on the streets. And in the end, after all the shouting and the slamming of doors, Lisa just stormed off to the bedroom and left me in the living room, feeling like maybe I'd made a mistake. A few days later, Katie shows up with a couple of suitcases and that weary look on her face. I'll admit it felt good to help. She had nowhere else to turn, and despite our past, she was family. The first few days were uneventful. Katie mostly kept to herself, helped out around the house, and didn't get in the way. She even started pitching in with the chores like cooking and cleaning, which honestly was more than I expected. But then Lisa started acting different. At first, it was subtle. She'd come home from work, see me and Katie joking around in the kitchen, and then immediately get all passive-aggressive. Must be nice to just hang around and laugh all day while some of us have to work. Stuff like that. At first, I brushed it off, thought she was just adjusting to the change. But the comments didn't stop. They got sharper. It didn't help that Katie was actually making things easier around the house. It was like she was trying to prove herself, maybe make up for the fact that she was crashing on our couch, and that seemed to eat away at Lisa even more. Every time I'd say something nice about how Katie made dinner or folded the laundry, Lisa would twist it around. "Wow, looks like you've got a new housewife," she'd say with a sneer. And when I tried to defend Katie, it only made things worse. We started fighting. A lot. And it was different from our usual arguments. I'm talking about screaming matches that would wake the neighbors, with Lisa accusing me of God knows what, saying I was playing house with Katie, that I was too close to her. And Katie? She'd just sit in the other room, probably listening to the whole thing, and then the next day pretend like nothing happened. The tension was like this thick fog hanging over our house. I'd come home from work and feel it the second I walked through the door. Lisa would be in the living room, glaring at me, like she was just waiting for me to do something wrong. And Katie? She'd be trying to help, saying things like, maybe I should leave, but I'd tell her to stay because I couldn't bring myself to kick her out. It just didn't feel right. It wasn't long before the jealousy turned into full-blown paranoia. Every little thing set Lisa off. If I spent too much time in the same room as Katie, she'd lose it. One night after dinner, Lisa just snapped, threw her plate down, glass shattering everywhere, and screamed, "I bet you wish she was your wife, don't you?" And then she stormed out, leaving me standing there in the mess, dumbfounded. I looked over at Katie, who just stared back at me, wide-eyed and silent. I didn't know what to say. I was caught between wanting to comfort my wife and not wanting to throw Katie under the bus. And then, of course, there was that nagging feeling that maybe Lisa was just overreacting, letting her jealousy get the best of her. That's when I started to notice Lisa's behavior changing in other ways. She was coming home later and later from work. She'd say she was working late, but it didn't add up. Sometimes she'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. And then there were the times when she'd walk into the room, see me sitting with Katie, and just roll her eyes like she couldn't even stand to look at me. "Lisa, we need to talk about this," I said one night, trying to get her to open up, trying to find out what was really going on. But she brushed me off. "I'm tired, Mike. Can we not do this right now?" And that was the end of it. She'd shut down any attempt at a real conversation, and I'd be left wondering what the hell happened to my marriage. In those moments, I started to question everything. Was it a mistake bringing Katie in? Was I missing something obvious? I thought I was just being a good guy, helping family. But now, all of a sudden, my whole life was spinning out of control. And Lisa, my wife, my partner, the person I was supposed to trust more than anyone, was turning into someone I didn't even recognize. Someone who seemed to hate me more with every passing day. And that's how it all began, with an unexpected guest and the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. It all started as little things, the kind of changes you might notice but brush off. You tell yourself you're overthinking. Lisa started coming home late from work more often, always with some excuse about a big project or helping out her boss. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when she walked through the door, her mood was all over the place. One night she'd be tense, hardly speaking to me. And the next, she'd be overly cheerful, like she was trying way too hard to pretend everything was normal. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at my cold dinner, waiting for her to come home, trying to make sense of what was happening. But anytime I tried to bring it up, she'd shut me down. "I'm just tired, Mike," she'd say, dismissive. And that was that. I'd go to bed with more questions than answers, wondering why it felt like I was losing my wife to something, or someone, I couldn't see. The turning point came one night when I was driving home from work. I took a different route, cutting through downtown to avoid some traffic. And there they were, Lisa and this guy, standing outside some fancy restaurant. I recognized him immediately. Daniel, the colleague she'd mentioned before. But they weren't just standing there. They were laughing, leaning in close to each other like they were sharing some private joke. I saw her touch his arm, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled over a block away and just sat there, staring at them through the rearview mirror. My stomach twisted in knots. It wasn't anything blatant. They didn't kiss or hold hands, but it was the kind of intimacy that you know in your bones isn't right. I wanted to storm out of the car, confront them right then and there, but I stayed put. My mind was racing, trying to convince myself that maybe I was blowing this out of proportion. Maybe they really were just colleagues who got along well. But deep down, my instincts told me otherwise. When she got home later that night, I asked her about it, trying to sound casual. "So, how's Daniel?" I asked, testing the waters. She looked at me with that fake innocence she's so good at. "What do you mean?" she replied, her tone flat and dismissive. "I saw you two together," I said, my voice more accusatory than I intended. And then it came, the performance, the look of feigned surprise, the defensive scoff. "Oh, for God's sake, Mike. We were just grabbing a bite after work. He's just a friend, okay? Don't make it into something it's not." But here's the thing. I knew Lisa. I knew when she was telling the truth and when she was lying through her teeth. And that night, I knew she was lying. Her eyes darted around the room. She wouldn't look me in the eye, and she kept talking in circles. It felt like she was hiding something, and my blood boiled at the thought of being played for a fool. I didn't push it further that night. Part of me didn't want to hear more lies. I just nodded and let it go, but it ate away at me. I turned to Katie. She was the only one who could understand what was happening inside our house. One night after Lisa had stormed off to bed in one of her moods, I pulled Katie aside. "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Katie gave me this look like she'd been expecting me to open up for a while. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice soft but concerned. I told her everything, about the late nights, the moods, and seeing Lisa with Daniel. And Katie listened. Really listened, not interrupting or judging. When I was done, she shook her head, looking more angry than surprised. "Something's not right," she said firmly. "I mean, who does that? Laughing with some guy while you're married?" She said it like she couldn't believe Lisa had the audacity. Then she leaned in, her voice low like we were sharing a secret. "You need to keep an eye on her, Mike. If she's doing something she shouldn't be, you deserve to know." It felt good to have someone on my side, someone who validated my suspicions. I agreed, and from that point on, I was on high alert. Every time Lisa's phone buzzed, every time she left the room to take a call, my heart would race. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was with him, if she was sharing parts of her life that should have been reserved for me. It drove me crazy. I started keeping track of when she'd leave, when she'd come home. I'd take mental notes on everything she said, trying to piece together some pattern, some slip-up that would confirm my fears. It wasn't long before the paranoia got the better of me. One night, Lisa was supposed to be working late again. Katie was in the living room, reading a book, but she glanced up at me as I paced back and forth, restless. "Why don't you just check her phone?" she finally suggested. "If she's got nothing to hide, there won't be anything to find." I didn't need much convincing. The phone was right there, lying on the kitchen counter, innocently enough. I picked it up, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest, and I had to keep telling myself to breathe. It felt like I was crossing some line, violating some unspoken rule, but at that point I needed answers. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. I scrolled through her messages, trying to keep my cool. Most of it was just mundane stuff, work chatter, texts from friends. But then I saw it. Daniel. His name stared back at me from the screen, and my fingers felt like lead as I tapped on the conversation. The most recent message, sitting right there at the top, was simple enough. "Let's meet up. Same place as last time." That's when the world seemed to tilt. My head spun, and my grip tightened on the phone. There was plain as day. All the suspicions, the paranoia, the gut feelings, it all crystallized in that one message. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But there it was, the evidence staring me in the face. I put the phone down, my mind racing a million miles a minute. I looked over at Katie, who was watching me intently. "Well?" she asked, sitting up straight. I told her what I found, and she shook her head, cursing under her breath. "She's a bitch, Mike," Katie said, her voice cold and angry. "You deserve better than this." And I knew she was right. But what the hell was I supposed to do now? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into a dark, endless abyss, knowing that whatever move I made next would change everything. After finding that damn message on Lisa's phone, I couldn't think straight. My head was spinning, my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free. You don't know real betrayal until it's staring you in the face in the form of a text message. Something so simple, so stupid, and yet it has the power to shatter your world in an instant. I didn't know what to do, so I did what had become routine for me over the last couple of weeks. I turned to Katie. She was in the kitchen, making coffee like it was just another night. But when I walked in, I must have looked like a ghost because she immediately put the mug down and rushed over. "What happened?" she asked, voice steady, but eyes filled with that intensity I'd grown used to. I handed her the phone, pointing to Daniel's message. She read it, lips tightening into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as she took in the words. "You see?" I said, my voice cracking from a mix of anger and disbelief. "She's meeting him. Tonight." Katie glanced up at me, and I could see that familiar flash of anger in her eyes. "You know what you need to do?" she said, setting the phone down. "You need to catch her in the act. Make her face what she's doing. No more of this sneaking around, hoping she'll tell you the truth. She won't. Trust me." It felt crazy, like something out of a TV show, not real life. But at that point, I was desperate. "So, what do we do?" I asked, feeling a mix of dread and determination. Katie didn't miss a beat. "We go to the bar," she said. "We see it for ourselves. She's expecting to meet him tonight, right? Well, we'll be there too." The idea of watching my wife meet up with this guy made my stomach turn. I didn't know if I was ready to see it, to see her laughing with him, flirting, doing all the things she used to do with me. But there was a part of me that needed to see it, needed to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was lying to my face and betraying our marriage. I wanted the truth, no matter how much it hurt. So, that night, when Lisa came home to get ready for her so-called girls' night out, I played dumb. I sat on the couch, watching TV, pretending everything was normal. She breezed in, her mood annoyingly cheerful, and headed straight to the bathroom to shower and change. I listened to the water running, feeling like every drop was another nail in the coffin of our relationship. When she finally emerged, she was all done up, a tight dress that hugged her curves, heels that made her legs look like they went on for miles, and her hair styled just the way I liked it. "Going somewhere special?" I asked, trying to keep the venom out of my voice. She smiled, that same smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest guy in the world, but now just made me sick. "Just out with the girls," she said, grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up." As soon as she left, I sprang into action. Katie was ready to go, and we headed to the bar that Daniel's message had mentioned. It was one of those trendy places, the kind of spot Lisa never went to with me. I wondered how many times she'd been there with him. We parked a block away and sat there for a while, waiting, hearts pounding in unison. Katie leaned over and said, "You ready for this?" "No," I admitted, but I knew there was no turning back. We walked in, and it didn't take long to find them. There they were, sitting at a booth near the back, cozied up like they were on some romantic date. My stomach dropped. She was laughing, her whole face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. And Daniel, that bastard, he was leaning in close, whispering something in her ear, making her giggle like a schoolgirl. I wanted to go over there, flip the table, and drag him outside by his collar. But Katie grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Don't," she whispered. "Just watch." So that's what we did. We found a spot at the bar, just far enough to stay out of sight, but close enough to see everything. And as I watched them, I felt my heart break over and over again. She was so happy, so at ease, like she didn't have a care in the world. I wondered if she thought about me at all, if she felt even a shred of guilt for what she was doing. Probably not. We watched them order drinks. Cocktails, the kind she rarely ever drank when we were out together. They clinked their glasses and toasted to something I couldn't hear. And then she leaned in, smiling that wide, carefree smile that used to be reserved for me. Daniel put his hand on hers, fingers brushing over her knuckles, and she didn't pull away. I felt like I was going to be sick. Katie's hand was still on my arm, grounding me, and I could feel her anger radiating off her like heat. "She doesn't deserve you, Mike," Katie whispered, her voice filled with disgust. "Look at her. Look at how easily she lies to you." Part of me wanted to confront them right then, to call her out in front of the whole damn bar. I wanted to scream at her, ask her how she could do this to me, to us. But I also felt this overwhelming sense of shame. Like if I caused a scene, I'd be the one who looked crazy, not her. And I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking she'd won. So instead, I just sat there, watching my wife flirt with another man, feeling my marriage disintegrate right in front of my eyes. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel stood up and took her hand. They headed toward the exit, and my heart pounded with every step they took. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I had a feeling that whatever it was, it would be the end of everything. "Come on," Katie said, grabbing her jacket. "Let's get out of here before they see us." We left the bar, and as we walked back to the car, I felt like I was walking through a fog, my mind numb from what I'd just witnessed. "What do we do now?" I asked Katie, my voice barely more than a whisper. She turned to me, her eyes hard, determined. "We make her pay," she said simply. And as crazy as it sounded, I believed her. I needed to believe her, because at that moment, it felt like revenge was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. But as we drove home, the reality of what I'd seen started to sink in. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for years, was meeting up with some other guy, laughing with him, touching him, making plans with him behind my back. And it wasn't some fling. This was calculated, planned, and that hurt more than I could ever put into words. By the time we got back to the house, I felt like a hollow shell of myself. I knew things were going to change. I just didn't know how or when. But one thing was certain. The woman who walked out of our front door that night wasn't my wife. Not anymore. After we got home that night, I felt like my whole world was teetering on the edge. I couldn't shake the image of Lisa and Daniel, laughing together, lost in their own little world while mine fell apart. Everything felt like a bad dream, one of those nightmares where you're screaming, but no sound comes out. But I wasn't asleep. This was real life, and I was wide awake, staring down the barrel of my crumbling marriage. Katie was waiting for me in the living room. She'd gone straight to the liquor cabinet, already pouring us both a glass of wine. "Here," she said, handing me one and clinking her glass against mine. "You look like you need this." She was right. I downed half the glass in one go, feeling the burn as the alcohol hit my throat. It did nothing to dull the ache in my chest, but it was better than feeling everything all at once. I sank into the couch, staring blankly at the wall, the silence of the house pressing in on me like a weight I couldn't escape. Katie sat beside me, closer than usual, and for a moment, we just drank in silence. "Talk to me, Mike," she said eventually, her voice soft. You can't keep all this bottled up. So I told her. Every twisted detail. The way Lisa's smile looked different when she was with him. The touch of their hands, the way she lit up around Daniel like she never did with me anymore. And Katie, she just listened, nodding, cursing under her breath, her eyes hardening with every word. You don't deserve this, she said, almost spitting the words out. She's making a fool out of you. You give her everything, and she repays you like this? God, I just want to make her pay. The anger in her voice mirrored the fury I felt inside, and I downed the rest of my wine, feeling the tension in me build with every passing second. Yeah, well, what am I supposed to do? I muttered, staring into my empty glass. She's off living her secret life, and I'm just stuck. I don't even know who she is anymore. Katie refilled my glass and leaned in closer, her voice low and deliberate. You know, if Lisa is so worried about me being around you, maybe we should give her something to really worry about. I blinked, looking up at her in confusion. What do you mean? She gave me a sly smile, one I'd never seen before, and it felt like a challenge. Think about it, Mike. She's out there, having her fun with Daniel. Maybe it's time she knows what it feels like to be on the other side of things. You know, give her a taste of her own medicine. She took a sip of her wine, never breaking eye contact, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I was stunned. The thought of cheating, of sinking to Lisa's level, had never crossed my mind. I wasn't that guy. Or, at least I didn't think I was. I can't do that, Katie, I said, shaking my head. I'm not like her. Maybe you should be. Katie shot back, her voice fierce. What's stopping you? She doesn't respect you. She doesn't love you. She's out there, living her double life. And you're here, being the good husband, suffering in silence. Screw that, Mike. You deserve to be happy, too. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, the idea of cheating felt like crossing a line I couldn't come back from. But then again, hadn't Lisa already crossed it? Wasn't she out there right now, with another man, lying to me with every breath she took? I looked at Katie, and for the first time, I saw her not just as my cousin, but as someone who understood me, who was willing to stand by my side no matter what. The wine was starting to work its way through my system, clouding my judgment, blurring the lines of right and wrong. You really think it's a good idea? I asked, my voice quieter than before. Katie leaned in closer, and I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, mixed with the wine on her breath. I think it's the only way to take back some control, she whispered. She doesn't get to treat you like this and walk away scot-free. And if she's so worried about us being close, let's give her something real to worry about. It felt like something out of a movie, the tension building between us. The room seemed to close in around us, the air thick with unspoken words and the weight of what we were about to do. I wanted to say no, to be the better person. But as Katie's hand brushed against mine, as her fingers interlaced with mine, something inside me snapped. The anger, the betrayal, the need for revenge, it all came rushing to the surface, drowning out every other thought. And before I knew it, I was kissing her. It started slow, tentative, like we were both testing the waters. But once we crossed that line, there was no going back. It was messy, frantic, a desperate attempt to feel something, anything, other than the pain I'd been carrying for weeks. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. I didn't think about Lisa or Daniel or the consequences. It was just me and Katie, two people trying to make sense of a world that had fallen apart. We stumbled our way to the bedroom, shedding clothes, our hands roaming over each other like we were trying to grasp onto something real, something solid. I knew it was wrong, that it would change everything, but I didn't care. In that moment, all I wanted was to forget, to lose myself in someone who actually gave a damn about me. And Katie, she was right there, meeting my every move, whispering words of encouragement, telling me I deserved this, that I deserved to feel wanted. By the time it was over, we lay there, tangled in the sheets, breathing heavy. And for a moment, there was silence. A silence that felt more comforting than anything I'd felt in weeks. But then, reality crashed back in, and I couldn't help but wonder what the hell we'd just done. The next morning was a blur. I woke up to the sound of the front door opening, and panic hit me like a freight train. Lisa was home. I bolted upright, and there was Katie, lying beside me, still half asleep, but it was too late. The door swung open, and there she was, standing in the doorway, staring at us with eyes wide in disbelief. What the actual F? Lisa's voice cracked through the silence like a whip, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. She stormed into the room, her face contorted with rage. Are you kidding me, Mike? In our bed? I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain myself, but then again, what was there to explain? She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. But of course, Lisa didn't see it that way. How could you do this to me? She screamed, her voice shaking with anger. After everything I've done for you, after all these years, and this is how you repay me? Katie got out of bed, wrapping the sheets around her, trying to calm Lisa down. Maybe you should think about your own choices before you start blaming others, she said, her voice calm but firm. But Lisa wasn't having any of it. You're both disgusting, she spat, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of guilt or regret. They were tears of rage, of indignation. It was like she couldn't comprehend how someone could betray her, the queen of hypocrisy. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry for what I'd done. Because as I stood there, looking at the woman who'd torn our marriage apart, who'd made me question my worth, my sanity, I realized that this was the moment everything changed. There was no going back, no fixing what was broken. And maybe that was okay. Lisa's face went red with anger, her eyes wild as she screamed. How could you? How could you do this to me, Mike? To us? She stood there in the doorway, trembling, hands clenched into tight fists, as if ready to hit someone. Maybe me, maybe Katie, maybe herself. Her words came out like venom, bitter and filled with rage. She launched into this fit, ranting about betrayal, acting like the victim in all of this, as if she hadn't been sneaking around with Daniel for who knows how long. Do you know what you've done? She shouted, her voice cracking. You've ruined everything. My life, our marriage. And you, she turned her attention to Katie, her voice dripping with contempt. You're a disgusting snake. Both of you. God, I can't believe this. I felt a surge of anger bubbling up inside me, a heat that made it hard to see straight. I was done listening to her twisted logic, done pretending like I was the problem, done with the lies. You want to talk about betrayal, Lisa? I said, my voice rising to match hers. Don't you dare act like the victim here. Don't forget that I know about Daniel. The room fell silent. Her mouth hung open, and her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape route. W, what are you talking about? She stammered, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Cut the crap, Lisa. I shot back, taking a step closer. I saw the messages. I saw you two at the bar. You think I'm an idiot? You think I don't know what's been going on behind my back? She froze, her whole body tensing like she was waiting for a blow to land. Then she did what she always does, tried to manipulate the situation, to twist the truth until it didn't look so ugly. It wasn't what you think, she said, her voice softening, as if a change in tone would change the facts. He's just a friend. I mean, I never meant for it to go so far. I was lonely, Mike. You were so wrapped up in your own world, and I needed someone to talk to. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After all the crap she put me through, she still found a way to make herself out to be the victim, to act like her choices were somehow my fault. I laughed, an ugly, bitter laugh. You know what? I'm done, I said, my voice calm but firm. I can't do this anymore, Lisa. I won't. I'm filing for divorce. You and Daniel can have each other, for all I care. Her face twisted in anger and disbelief. You're throwing this all away because of one mistake, she screamed. You'd break up our marriage over one stupid thing? It wasn't a mistake, Lisa. It was a choice, I said, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders as I spoke. And you made it, over and over again. For the first time, Lisa didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, shaking with fury, her chest heaving as she glared at me, and then at Katie. She stormed out of the room, and for a long time, we just sat there in silence, the sound of her slamming doors and throwing things echoing through the house. Katie didn't say much after that. I think we both knew that we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross, and that things would never be the same between us. A few days later, Katie packed up her things and told me she'd found a place to stay. I think it's for the best, she said, and I couldn't argue with that. There was too much history, too much damage. And while I didn't regret what happened between us, I knew we couldn't go back to pretending everything was normal. We tried to keep things friendly after she left, but there was always this awkwardness, like we were tiptoeing around a minefield. And Lisa, she was just gone. She moved out of the house a week later, leaving behind a note that said she'd stay with a friend until things blew over. But I knew it wasn't about things blowing over. She just didn't want to face what she'd done. The divorce process was ugly, as they often are. She fought me on every little thing: the house, the money, the furniture. At one point, she even tried to guilt me into changing my mind, saying that we could work through this, and that I was just being vindictive for wanting to end things. But I held my ground. It was over, and nothing she could say would change that. After the dust settled and the paperwork was signed, I found myself standing in the middle of what used to be our home, feeling this strange mix of freedom and emptiness. Everything was different now. I had no idea what came next, but I knew one thing. I was going to rebuild, piece by piece. The weeks that followed were a blur of trying to find myself again. I picked up old hobbies that I'd abandoned over the years: fishing, hiking, even learning to cook a half-decent meal for myself. It felt weird at first, trying to fill the empty spaces where Lisa used to be, but eventually it got easier. I started hanging out with friends I hadn't seen in ages, the ones who disappeared into the background while my marriage fell apart. Katie and I kept in touch. She was doing her own thing, finding her own place in the world, and while we talked from time to time, there was never any talk of rekindling whatever it was that happened between us. We both knew it was a mistake, a desperate act in the midst of chaos. And while there was a part of me that still felt connected to her, we kept things strictly platonic. There were moments, though, late at night when I'd lie in bed and think about everything that happened, wondering if I'd made the right choices, wondering if maybe I'd lost more than I'd gained. But I came to realize that forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself move on. So I forgave Lisa, as much as one can forgive someone who ripped your heart out and stomped on it. But more importantly, I forgave myself for the mistakes I'd made, for the things I'd done out of anger and desperation. Life started to make sense again, in a different way. I found new routines, a new normal, and eventually I started dating. Nothing serious at first, just casual dinners, awkward small talk over coffee. But one day I met someone who didn't make me feel like I had to try so hard. Someone who saw me, the real me, and didn't expect me to be anything else. As we spent more time together, I realized that love isn't about finding someone who makes you whole. It's about finding someone who makes you better, who pushes you to be honest and open, who trusts you and who you can trust in return. It took losing Lisa to learn that lesson, but I came out of it stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the simple things like waking up next to someone who actually wants to be there. Looking back, I don't have any regrets. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it all led me to where I am now. And maybe that's what life is all about. Learning, letting go, and finding new ways to love and be loved, even after everything's fallen apart.